Welcome back to Story Deep Dive. This is Rachel and Dana, and today we are wrapping up our discussion of the things we never got over. But before we get into that, Dana, what you got going on over there?
We are preparing for our February workshop. So that is always kind of gets my brain cells going, especially because we plan our workshops at least for the quarter last year. So first of all, trying to remember what I was thinking when I created the idea. Because that does count. And starting the process of just working on that. And so I'm excited because this year I wanted to do some new stuff. Teach the same thing a different way, go in a little bit deeper in some places, revisit other places. And so I'm working on that. And so that's going to be fun. And we're opening it up to like our general, like everybody in our community. So it's an open workshop. So those are always fun because there are people interacting that I am not familiar with. So we get different questions. And so that's a lot of fun. So I'm working on that. And of course, back to writing. I'm officially off of vacation. I was working, but it was kind of like working a little bit, playing a lot. Exactly. Parlaying. So I'm back like full blood because that was my last little hoorah after the anniversary. So now we are back in full swing. And so, it's just been, honestly, the past couple of weeks have been like bumpy, but it will get smooth in February. And so getting into the flow, doing podcast interviews. I think I had 3 podcast interviews last week. So it's just been busy. But no complaints, none whatsoever. Having fun. What about you? Because you're back into, you came back to work before I did.
Yeah. We are full in the swing of things, or we're trying to be. I didn't have Power Week like you had, but it's still kind of a bumpy start where, it's like you project everything for not even for the new year, right? Just for January. And then it's just stuff changes. It's just the way that life is. But you show up and you're so ready for like everything that you see on the calendar and like in the expectations, and then you get the curveballs when the months just start and you're like, what? Hey, I planned for this, excuse me. So we're rolling with the punches. I was in a total book slump. Like I have an endless TBR, and I was looking for, and I knew which books I wanted to read next. But what'll trip me up is when the book that I was like, because I'll pick out books for clients, right? We'll read them together and we use them as kind of reference material. But I was pulling out some new books that I hadn't read before for my clients. Then I got into the books and I was like, no, not just no across the board, no to this. And so then you're kind of like fumbling, right? And you're trying to like,
Why no?
I don't want to say they weren't good because that's maybe like excessively ungenerous, but they were very much like not a resource that I would recommend to my client, especially for the kind of book that they were trying to write. And also even in some published books, right, you'll see some kind of like bad habits, or even depending on what year they were published, there are certain things that are trendy that really don't work anymore, or that are just not, they makes them feel dated in certain ways. And so there are these things that you're sort of like, I really don't recommend you like follow the example of this book. And so then, I'll email my client, we'll sort of mutually agree like, hey, I don't like this. But then you got to go, you're kind of like scrambling to find a new book. So finally locked on some book picks. We've got a new game that we started on Twitch in the last couple of weeks, which is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And I'm really excited about this one because the Assassin's Creed games are wonderful examples of historical fiction where you place a fictional character in a historical setting and they experience historical events and historical characters. And it's really a great example of how to do that effectively. And then Assassin's Creed as a franchise in particular, they kind of layer in this little bit of like alternative history, like kind of speculative fiction almost, where you sort of have this like overarching kind of conspiracy that takes place over the ages. But it's a really great example of that. They do a lot of great character development and like they do great story arcs. So I'm really excited to be digging into that game for honestly probably the next couple of months. It's kind of a long game, so we're in it for the long haul.
Okay, so I have two questions. I know that's not what this is about. We're going to get to it, but this is fascinating to me because I've seen you play. So I think it's two questions. One being, how is it for you to sort of kind of switch modes when it comes to working with and assessing content for writers versus when you're looking at it from the perspective of games? Because I would think games would be like games, almost like comic books, like shorter form, but you still have to have depth. Like, how is that looking at those two different sort of worlds?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that I take really seriously is understanding the medium I'm in, right? So if I'm writing a book, I am not making a movie. If I'm making a movie, I am not writing a book. And so there's storytelling that's important, and there's things that we can use and learn across mediums. But you sort of I think it's important to respect the medium that you're in and the expectations of the medium. So video games are an interactive as well as a written, as well as a visual medium, right? So you're taking into account the global story arc is really important, that the pacing makes sense, but you also know that you're pacing it over it could be a 10-hour game, it could be a 60-hour game, right? With like you also have subplots that'll branch off. So the requirements are a little bit different because the player gets to be in control of aspects of their journey. So I'm looking also at things like character development and dialogue. Video games are really good to look at for like overarching plots where you get like your major plot points, because those are usually fairly like they're static within the game. So no matter how you choose to play, you will hit these particular like plot points in the game. And then character development, character arcs, and dialogue are some of the ways, like some of the things that you can really look at more closely in video games, because those are outside of game mechanics, which is a game specific to the medium. Those are things that you can kind of pull out and translate into writing novels. So I'm very aware of where these two mediums diverge and where they converge, and try to make sure I'm drawing and appreciating the distinctions between mediums.
One day we listen, I'm not volunteering to play a game. Because if it ain't Sudoku, listen, I realized that my game playing days was back when we used to have to blow the game and pop it to get it to work. So it's
The good old days.
it totally aged myself. So, but I would like to talk more about that. I think that is so fascinating, because it makes me think about how whenever I'm talking to someone and they say, oh yeah, I want to do a bunch of short stories, and they automatically assume it's the same thing as writing a novel or writing a novella, or in this case, like what we're talking about now, what I would classify as a meta novel, right? And it's not. It's not. The scope of the idea, the scope of the character development, what type of subplots, what type of dynamics do the characters have before they enter in that book, or when we enter the book, are so important, and how you pace yourself is so important. And I just think that's very, I really, well, because I've watched you play even games. Listen, I have no business even watching. And the fact I'm like, this how much I love her. Because keep my husband like, you're still watching? I'm like, yes, I got to watch it from a distance because I'm getting nervous.
You're supporting me from the back bleachers, and I am so grateful.
I'm going to be hollering loud and clapping, but I have no idea what's going on. I can contribute nothing but enthusiasm and love. That is my contribution.
We love it. We love it. That's what friends are for.
That's right. That is absolutely correct. Give me credit for it, because maybe I'll be showing up and look dressed wrong, inappropriate. I don't even ask questions. I don't even ask questions no more, because everybody be like, what is she doing? It's obvious. She's not a part of this. Oh, goodness. But it's hilarious. But no, that's amazing. I love it, love it, love it. And I look forward to you bringing on, like, talking more about it too, because I think sometimes I remember having students reach out to me and talking to me about gaming or changing something into a comic book or changing something into a screenplay. And I think we automatic. uh, no, I don't want to. It's not. I don't want to do just like a general, like a huge generalization. But it's like, yes, it's all story based, but how you deliver it, how you prepare, it can make a big difference, not in just the outcome of the story, but even in your like how much fun that you have during the writing process. And so taking it, like you said, like taking into consideration the different the constraints and also the creative liberties that are a part of the structure itself, it just always sounds so interesting to me. Okay, those were my questions. I think it was another one. It'll come back another day or time.
That's that's perfect. Those are really good questions. So I want to go ahead and move us into our takeaways from the things we never got over. So I know I had lots of thoughts and lots of takeaways, and you showed me your stack of notes, so I know that you also have a stack of takeaways for us. But you know the drill. First, hit me with that summary.
Okay, so I just created a general overview. And so it is in Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. Naomi Witt, a runaway bride, arrives in the quirky small town of Knockemout, Virginia, to help her estranged twin sister, only to find herself saddled with her niece and penniless after her sister skips town. Enter Knox Morgan, the town's grumpy but secretly protective barber who reluctantly steps in to help Naomi rebuild her life. As Naomi navigates her newfound responsibilities and Knox wrestles with his emotional walls, their slow burn romance unfolds against a backdrop of small town charm, humor, and unexpected danger. This story masterfully blends beloved romance tropes like grumpy sunshine and found family while delivering strong character arcs and an emotionally satisfying journey. And yeah, that's what we have for Things We Never Got Over.
Awesome. That's your I One of the things that I noticed over the course of these episodes is you did a new summary depending on the subject. And I felt like, I gotta step up my game. My summary for Ninth House was the same every time. I was just like, I got the summary. Here you go. This is the summary that I wrote. And we have a tailored, handmade summary for every episode. And I was like, whoa, next book, I gotta
That's it. I'm not even gonna fret. Y'all already know I'm the Chat GPT queen. Okay, so
Yes. You're Miss Shiro, Dana.
so me and my writing assistant, you know what I'm saying? We understood the assignment.
So, okay, so where do you want to take us in terms of takeaways? Like, we'll even say high level. What are some of the key takeaways that you are kind of pulling from these books as you're looking at them through the lens of an editor, as well as, as a writer, and what writers can take away from this book?
Mhm. I think because this book is what I would classify as a mega novel, there are so many things that we could talk about. If you were doing it right, for this page count and this word count, there is a lot of things going on. And I think anybody that comes to this, there may be some key things that are overlapping, but it's always going to be through the lens of what you like and what you write and what rises to the surface for you. So for me, what I decided to do was look at it from the perspective of, if somebody was coming to me and I knew that this was the book that I was recommending, why would I recommend it to them? As a writer wanting to do what? Why would I say, read this book? And listen, if you are one of my students, we have read this book a million times. And the reason why, again, in my head, I think Lucy Score should be one of my BFFs. She doesn't know it. I won't do anything to embarrass us in public, but one day, she might be doing a side eye. Listen, I hope she's really nice in person, because then I would have to take that. But anyways, I was thinking about if I was recommending this book, and I think on site, or even when you go to the landing page, and how you realize how long it is, it could be really quick to pass it over. And so I wanted to be very specific as to why I think you should give it a chance. And when you give it that chance, you should be in a position to read it several times. And so you should like this book, right? You should really like it so that you can find yourself digging into it over and over again. So basically taking that perspective. And so with that said, I wanted us to sort of, and will talk like we normally do, but I think structure, well, actually, honestly, I'll start with tropes. Tropes is probably one of the biggest reasons that I love this story. She does some tropes justice to where her character should be standing up, in the dictionary, near that trope. And so tropes, another thing that I thought was really important about this book is the structure, her ability to look at plots, subplots, pacing, also the fact that it is a really good book one. It is a really good book one for a series. And so looking at the structure, the other thing, which we had a great discussion on this, and so, and you guys would have already heard it, but it would be the characters. This is a excellent example of having a story where when you really look at it, it is complex characters with a very simple plot. And the characters are rich and deep, and it's not just her, or it's not just him, it's them, and it's even the people that are closest to them and around them. The other thing that I want to just touch upon, which because this is romance, I write romance. This is a slow burn. It's a super slow burn. Now, it's not super slow, but it's slow enough. But she has chemistry from the beginning. And that's not going to be a long conversation. But I think that conversation is great for people, whether you write romance and you want to write a slow burn, or if you write another genre and you want a subplot that is a romance, that is a slow burn.
Yep. Oh man, I had that in my notes too. I was like, if you have either slow burn and or enemies to lovers, even in a romantic subplot, you should go ahead and grab this book.
Exactly. So we'll talk about that. And the final thing that I think that I have, I think it's the final thing. Yes. The final thing that I have is thinking about themes. For me, themes are early in the process. You don't hear people talk a lot about things unless you're hearing someone talk about like more on the creative writing side, or the writing books, but I believe that, especially if you're a person that you are tapped into your brand, themes are important. Themes are important to your brand. Themes are important to your tone. Themes are important to this series, and it just carries over. So even if we can touch a little bit on themes and how important they were, and yeah, and so that's what I have. It seems like a lot, and I think we can cover it because it's not about going deep. We're going a little bit wide, but that's why you can go back to the others, and hence the recommendation: read the book. And I should say every single episode that this is an excellent audiobook. It is a great audiobook. So you are winning either way, but diving in. So those are the areas that I have to sort of go over, and yeah, look for us to chat about today.
Amazing. Amazing. So if it's okay, because this is some of some of my first notes, I would really love to talk, to start our conversation with the structure. If it's okay if we come back around to the tropes after structure.
Yeah, dive in.
Okay. So because I think you made a really important point. So this book is freaking long. This is like, take a romance novel and make it Brandon Sanderson length, right? Like that is a colossal undertaking for a romance novel.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that Lucy Score can't let up. At no point can she not keep the hits coming, because otherwise, now this is even true in shorter books, and it's doubly true for a long book. if she slows down, if she lets it lag, you're going to start losing people because they're going to start falling off the bus because it's got a long way to go before we get to the end. So one of the things that she does so well is, so we have what I would say is our core plot, right? And that's kind of our love story, which is sort of, it's the primary, I'm kind of saying it's like the primary story. It's like what everyone's really showing up for. It's the kind of spine of what's happening. And then you have all of these subplots wrapping around that story. And they're kind of, we talked about the DNA strand, right? Where they're interweaving and kind of all connected together. And really using those subplots to make the action rise and fall together. So it's sort of like, if you think, so for writers, right, whether you're writing a really long novel, or even if you have a short novel with one subplot or two subplots, not, 50 or whatever Lucy Score is working with.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And you want those, and we talked about this with Ninth House a little bit as well, right? You want them to rise and fall together. So at your key like mile markers in the plot. So this is like your 25% mark, your 50% mark, your 75% mark, all of those. And then of course, at the 100% mark, all of those subplots should be hitting together, because what it's going to do, and this is how the pacing of this book works, is it's going to elevate the core conflict, because it's like, now not just this one thing is going wrong, but all of these other things are going wrong together, and all these things are going right together, and then we're kind of leading up for things to take a really, for the roller coaster to go back down. And so you really, when you're looking at a book with length like this, whether you're a fantasy writer, whether you're a romance writer writing a long old book, you can't, you don't get to slow down. We have to keep moving, and we have to keep the conflict going, because again, you risk losing readers if you think that because you have 600 pages, you can just take your time and just meander around. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it, because your readers won't, and you don't want to either.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And not just that. I think even if you're reading the physical book and you're starting to tap out and you look and you turn and look to the side and you see how many pages you have left to go. But I think the flip side of that as a writer could be you're doing team too much. You don't realize you're doing team too much. I think with Lucy's Score, if you actually looked at her page and her prose and the balance between prose and dialogue, you'll see that there's a lot of dialogue. And so I think that's another reason why she has so many subplots, because there's a lot of things going on. So while all the dialogue is going on, we are learning about the characters and we are seeing the characters in action. And this is how she keeps that pace moving as well. I think when you're talking about the rise and the fall, you're talking about like the sequencing of the beats for those subplots as well as the overall beats for the act, so that you're still getting to those points where everything sort of converges before it almost explodes again. I wish I was like, I like to dibble dabble in art. I wish I was a little bit better to like describe this, but this is how I see it. It's almost like it's fine and then it sort of explodes and then it kind of comes in to kind of end that act before we spill them over into another act. And I believe that the reason why it works here is why people love it, right? That you have this environment that in theory is a small environment, but in fact, in story, it's robust. It's a small environment, but it's huge because of everybody being in everybody's business. And not only do you have, the people working at the bar, but the people working at the barbershop. And then you have the people that are, at Liza J's house. So it's like you have this really big world in a small container. And all of it is to show how well Knox and Naomi thrive or not thrive or they're struggling to with life and with their decisions and with their wounds and with the stakes that they're up against. And so, yes, I think this has a lot of subplots. And I think even though we don't even have to talk about the tropes individually, it folds, because I think what Lucy Score does, I don't know. I want to read more of her series, because to me in this series, it's almost as if she uses big tropes to change and shift between acts. It's almost like you're getting into a new story as you get into a new act. And I think that really does a great job for pacing, because you don't want to miss anything as a reader. You don't want, listen, when they finally get to the Stevie parts, you be like, wait a minute, but, and then our parents pop in, you're like, wait, go home, get out, come back later. And she just uses that. And so it's like this constant push and pull that she does that just keeps us awake and focused. And unlike for me with Lucy Score books, she makes me want to luxuriate in a book. Me putting it down is not putting it down because I can't come back. It's because I want to be able to milk everything from that experience. And I believe it's because her dance between structure and tropes, A+, chef's kiss. Give her an award. Like Rihanna said, a round of applause. All of that. And that's another reason why I love this book. And I think it could be, if you're a new writer, you can be like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. And I don't think that's ever what you want when you're like learning in this method, that it's inspiration. But I think it's, even if you took one or two things to get a better understanding, you would be a better writer for it, right? And so yeah, I told
the question.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry. I know I needed to cut in because I really want to ask you, because tropes is way more your specialty than it is mine. So we use sort of approximations of tropes in crime and in fantasy, but not in the same way that, romance, it's sort of like when you talk to your romance writers, you like need your tropes, you need to lock into them, you need to know what tropes you're doing, and you need to let your audience know what tropes you're doing. So if you're using tropes in crime or fantasy, you're kind of trying to be sneaky about it, because trope is almost a dirty word in crime or fantasy, right? Versus romance, it's a staple of the genre. So I kind of wanted to ask you, and we can kind of blend this over into tropes. How do you because Lucy Score does this so well, how do you sort of use your tropes and your plot to work together, right? Because it doesn't feel like the book doesn't feel tropey in that it's like Naomi is like sunshine, so she's just sort of like goofy and she gets herself into goofy scrapes, where it's sort of where it's almost like the plot, the tropes. No, the plot complicates the tropes. It's right. There's this balance where the characters get to be fully who they are, and the plot is what it is, and yet it's fully delivering on the trope expectations for romance readers. Can you suss that? Can you parse that out for me a little bit?
I can, but I'm gonna tell you first. I gotta back up. Whether people think it's a dirty word or not, I think it's the exact same. And here's why. I see that looking at tropes in the sense of story and structure, if you're looking at tropes, it's like looking at ingredients. You can't separate the eggs from the cake. It's just that if you identify your tropes on the front end and you know those are the tropes that you want as a part of your story, it helps you with your story structure from the beginning, because it comes with expectations. If you already know you have an enemies to lovers story, then you already have sort of a cadence in mind. So now you can begin to ask yourself different questions as a writer. Well, why do they hate each other? What is it that caused them to be enemies, and in what capacity, and what was surrounding that, and what are the moments that causes them to start poking holes in the theory, or what caused them to have that antagonistic relationship. And so I believe that every story genre can have the benefit of working out your stories in that way. And the reality is, whether you do it or you don't, they're still there. Why? Because you're still having crime. You're still going to have red herrings. You're still going to have multiple suspects. You still are going to have the person that you're, I don't know what the real word is, but that you're sure is it, but he's not, and it's meant to throw you off of your game. You're still going to have the moment where a lot of the the conflict is sort of this reflection of your protagonist's internal struggles and what they got to come through to be able to solve this crime and no longer allow other people to get hurt. Same thing. And so I think I honestly feel like the more people see that they're an ingredient of the process or of writing, that it will aid you as a writer, and it will endear you to your readers, and it will help you to poise yourself to market the book that you wrote and connect with your readers. And so here, though, I think she does that and then takes it up a notch because of the length. You almost have to. And instead of taking that enemies to lovers and dragging it across the entire book, she got to a point where that enemies to lovers sort of ran its course. And then those, at that point of lovers, they became a fake relationship. And then the fake relationship turns into a real relationship. And then the real relationship, they have a breakup because, wait, we're not in a relationship. Oh, yes, we are. We go together. Oh, no, listen, I'm petty. Okay, so what she does is almost use them, in my mind, in this story, almost like transitions. And now I don't think everyone will do it that way. But again, I think it serves the purpose here because the book is so long. And I think you want that. You want us to luxuriate in it, because taking out the word count means that we are taking out a lot of the discovery of the town, the secondary characters, the characters that are going to be important to the rest of the series. And it's causing us to have a different experience. And so I hope I answered that question well. But and I would say the final thing, and maybe this is something that we can discuss at a future date. Spending some time with Jen's book, I'm calling her by first name, the Trope Thesaurus books. Each one of her books are really helpful for this, because I think in the beginning she intentionally talks about different aspects. And I would say, even studying some of the books that you really love, looking at the tropes that are rooted in there and how they help the story to move, it can help not just on the execution, but even on the planning, on the editing, and then eventually on the marketing side.
Yeah. So, what are, when it comes to tropes and plot, either separately or together, what are some key questions that writers should be asking themselves if they're writing a book like this, or if they're new to working with tropes, or if they're juggling subplots? Like, what kinds of questions would you kind of have them asking themselves at this point?
Well, I think I don't know. I don't think you have to do one or the other. I will say, when I'm working, y'all listen, when I'm working, I know I'm a 4-act structure girl. I just know that. Point blank, period. Exactly. It's just easy to write. It's easier to evaluate. It's easier to edit. But however it is that you are laying out your story, and then looking at the tropes that you know that you want to play with, or you want to be a part of this experience, or the tropes that you can wrap around what you know to be true about your characters. And so it really, I think in this sort of monster of a thing, I would really love to interview her one day, because I don't know if she says, I know the whole story, or if she says, I'm writing the story as I go along. But in this case, I think it would be like, what is your overarching goal for that story? Without worrying about acts, without worrying about how they're going to progress. And then when you know what that overarching journey is, then sort of almost coming down into each one of those acts and sort of looking at them in their own sort of pockets within those boundaries. And how can you increase tension? How can you increase conflict? That helps the romance to evolve, and that helps them to get out of their own way, to get to a place where they can have their happily ever after, because we gotta have it, and also to become the kind of person that they feel like, this is what I want and I'm willing to do whatever. So they're evolving as well. And I believe, again, that having those tropes are helpful, because it's helpful for the reader and it's helpful for the writer. And I would say it can help you to start thinking about, well, how do I add more attention? What are the other things that I can do? And so I think that those are the questions of when you look at the overarching, then you can sort of bring it down. Are there ways that you can add more conflict, more stakes? How does a romance evolve? What are some of the things what are some of the lessons and moments that you want those characters to experience? And because if you already know what those are and you can tie them around a trope that's already popular, listen, they didn't have to necessarily be grumpy sunshine, but because they were, baby, Knox's whole disposition was messing up Naomi's constitution every time they turned around. Every time. And she was so sweet to everybody else. And he was like, wait, why is she smiling at them? And that's going to get them more grumpy, right? Which is more conflict, which sparks, more sparks. And so if you can make it so that you use those as tools to increase the conflict and all of that for us as readers, only to make the romance better. Because listen, he said the dude, what's the dude flying through town to distract his brother to get him away from her. And this is when he already knew she wasn't his type. But it didn't matter because he wanted her. He didn't even know he wanted her, but he wanted her. And so knowing that, the other thing about this, I think, because of the length and the types of questions you ask yourself, is you really don't want this sort of homogenous situation, right? You really want there to be conflicts, like I call inherent conflict. So you want them to be different, but the same, right? So sometimes knowing the tropes that you're sort of wrapping that person around, or you want to be a part of their character creation, it can help with that. Because him being, you need to look out for yourself. You need to focus, like not holding her with kid gloves when she's a little bit like she's a people pleaser, which can kind of make her seem a little bit wishy-washy. They need that. He needs to soften up. She needs to toughen up. And so knowing that, and so using those. And the final thing that I will say about that, like in using the dynamic of, you can use tropes, you can use questions, but if you use tropes, it just helps in the long run to me. The other part of it is sometimes it can also help you if you know, for example, like how your one character's disposition, and you haven't quite nailed down the other character yet. You could kind of just like, okay, what's on the opposite side of this coin? What will rub her the wrong way that requires her? Because even when he kept sort of nitpicking at her, it made her make a decision. She would have been like in that Roach Coach motel until something, and he was, no, you're not. So think of something else. And that made her have to make a decision. And so having those moments like that can also help you with creating the types of characters that really leap off of the page and that stay with us because they are constantly, they look like it's friction, but it's iron sharpening iron.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. There's like so many things. I didn't have anything against tropes in the first place, but I feel like I'm a believer in tropes now. I'm like, I don't know where, but I'm going to go find me some tropes and I'm going to use them, daggone it. Like I'm just...
what I'm using them for. I'm just going to use them.
That's right. I'm just going to collect some and then I'm going to do something with them. But I love this idea of like, first of all, like using your tropes and your structure. So you're using your tropes to fuel conflict. And you're also thinking of like, for example, like in the rising action, how are these tropes developing in the rising action, right? Like what is the conflict that's kind of coming from these tropes, or how is the action kind of shifting the trope that we're in? Just like the example that you gave us, like from the book, right? Where they become enemies to lovers. But I think you're right that, especially for the book being this long, if they had been, she does it in the third one where they kind of are enemies, I think, for a lot of the, like they stay enemies for most of the book. But I think it's easy to draw it out too, like it would have been easy to draw it out too long. And then it's like kind of annoying. And you also have to like justify the fact that like they're enemies and at midpoint they sleep together, right? Which again, she does it in the third book, but you're kind of trying to find these ways to keep the book moving and to keep the conflict going, but also letting it take a natural progression. Because I think, you know, for Sloane and Lucian, it works for them to be at each other's throats for most of the book because they have this long history. For Knox and Naomi, the antagonism between them isn't quite like, I don't know if it's enough that we would have seen them being enemy, you know what I mean? Like being enemies the whole dang time, right? And so using tropes to fuel conflict, but also to look inside of your story structure and see how the tropes themselves evolve over the course of the story. I hadn't thought of tropes in that way, and I think that's just a fantastic takeaway.
And even the examples that you gave, the reason why in book 3, we should have like ding, 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 read book 3 too. You know, the reason why that works in book 3, because then you have another trope that's involved with that, which is second chance, right? So you have the ability to stretch it out because those two already know each other. And this book, Knox and Naomi are learning each other. The other thing about the whole progression of like enemies to lovers and then fake relationship and then almost like going back to the enemies is because that moment when you get near the climactic point when they're doubling down, when he's doubling down on the fact that no, this ain't me, and you're trying to make it me be somebody that I want to be, but I still want you here. And she's like, oh no, buddy. This is Dana's retelling us.
She learned those boundaries at exactly the time that was the most inconvenient for Knox.
Listen, and he needed to go back to that and say, oh wait, this don't feel the same. This being closed off. Oh wait, so I got to let you in here, all the way in here to be able. And I think and really this is a bigger thing that's in play, and we're sort of sliding into the next one of complex characters, because as we play with that dynamic, as we look at that dynamic and we traverse that dynamic, then you start getting underneath those layers. You're peeling that onion back. And you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And what she does, it's like, she doesn't disappoint. Like both of them, like even the moments where they're sort of coasting in surface land and it feels like they're being deep, but really they're still avoiding and have a really cushy guard between what's going on in the external world and what's going on in their internal, and what wounds they're sort of protecting. White. They're doing a great job of it. But I think that also has a lot to do with this. Like the fun and games is all fun and games until somebody starts feeling something. And so she does that. But it just, all of it, again, it flows in well, but you really could look and all of those layers are present. Page one.
Yeah, she really gets us started on that trajectory. And that's the thing too, is like, you know, she doesn't, like we can kind of luxuriate, as you said, in the story because she sets things up like from the get-go and gets us invested in the problems that are present. And then the rest of the book we spend navigating those problems. So rather than sort of like dragging out, like, you know, are we going to learn about this thing? Are we going to learn about this thing? She really kind of gives us so many of those problems right up front. And then we spend the rest of the book solving those problems or coming in, you know, kind of confronting those problems. And I think that's another aspect of pacing where sort of like it's twofold. It's don't hold back on your protagonist and just get to the goods and follow that conflict through. Like instead of trying to like budget your conflict, bring us the conflict and then let it grow, let it evolve and pull us through it rather than feeling like, you know, you got to kind of like, you got to seed it, you know, and there's only so much conflict. So I have to budget it in the story and just go all in on that conflict. And again, don't give your protagonist a break and make them keep working for that transformation.
Yeah. And I think this also masks a lot of that well, because there's a lot of humor. There's a hefty cast. And so that can be, I think on the surface, you'll say, oh, that's what sort of floats it along. But there is a strong undercurrent in this story. And not only is it a strong undercurrent in the story, but the themes, which we'll talk about in a bit, like the themes that she addresses are pretty deep. What Knox is going through, that's not your regular run-of-the-mill, small town, at least to the extent that they've experienced it. And I really feel like that's a part of how she just handles everything overall. It's like it's all light and, it's coffee and it's Vikings, and it just seems so almost like super surface. But really, it's like, she's like, oh no, once she got you on the hook, and this is why this is like an amazing book. It's an amazing book, but yes.
Sorry, is this okay?
Go ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was going to use that to absolutely springboard us into the conversation about characters, because just exactly what you were saying, I think this hits on this idea that we have like a simple plot with complex characters, because every character has their baggage. It's not, because I think it's, and this is something that writers will struggle with, where they'll kind of have a flat cast, right? And it's just kind of like, this is the guy at the bakery. And he's sort of like, if you look behind him, he's actually a cardboard cutout, right? And he's like, got a little like a lever that's making a wave.
Those old Westerns where it was like a board here and then back behind it, it was just propped up.
Yes.
Or like a
fake shop front. But one of the things that she does is she gives every character something that they're going through, something that is causing them pain, or that is, and because there are characters who have their own baggage, we meet them as people who are on their own journey. And one of the things that I highlighted that was like, okay, so that's a good thing. You want that for your characters. You want your characters to feel like they're on their own journey. You want them to have their own wounds. But let me tell you, I think I said this in our previous episode, but it bears repeating. Use the plot to bring your protagonist into contact with those things. If you just do that work and then it's just like something random and they're like, aha, baggage, and you're like, you're not gonna, it's right, it's gonna feel like out of left field, and you're gonna feel a little bit like, what are you doing? What is this? What are you doing? I know the voices come out. That's how you know I have a feeling. That's how you know I have a feeling about it. But what Lucy Score does is Naomi's journey is what brings her into the intersection of these people and their journey. So, for example, she starts staying at Liza J's house. That's a part of Naomi's journey, that's a part of the plot. And in order to kind of like pay for it, she starts cleaning up Liza J's house. And she becomes kind of involved in Liza J's family. And so Naomi's journey and the things that she has to do to kind of keep moving forward have brought her into intersecting with Liza J, which shows her a little bit about Liza J. But we also see Liza J's journey kind of back into the light as someone who was kind of in the dark, in grief. And the same thing is true with Waylay. Waylay is some poor 11-year-old girl who got dumped on her aunt that she doesn't know by her mom when she's starting middle school. Middle school is terrible. Being 11 is hard. And she got dumped on her aunt who she doesn't know. And her mom sort of made it clear that she doesn't want her. But right at the very beginning of the story, Naomi becomes responsible for Waylay. So she comes into contact with Waylay's story, and we watch her try to help Waylay through her unique problems. And this even moves into Naomi having to, like, pardon me, dear listener, dear viewer, sack up and do some confrontation because we have some people acting crazy and they shouldn't be, and they're taking it out on Waylay, right? And so what we're seeing is Waylay in her process of trying to navigate being 11 and being a part, Naomi being sort of her stand-in mom. And this is overlapping with Naomi trying to learn how to be this person and have boundaries and get into conflicts. And so we're seeing the plot pushing her into those intersections. And that's how we are seeing the baggage and the struggles and the journeys of the other characters. And that's really important because it keeps it feeling deep and layered without feeling like random tangential stuff.
First of all, that was an amazing display. So y'all should pause and rewind and listen to that again. I think one of the things that you just going through that, it shows, number one, how you writing a story can intersect with other people that makes the people feel like I know them. She is me. I used to be Waylay. Oh my gosh, my husband is a Knox. Oh, and the more that you do that, you are just super gluing people to this story. And also what it's doing, I like the way that you said it, what kept going on in my brain is like, is sort of supersized version of the trifle cycle, right? Of like what this person has to go through, because Naomi is a person that's already struggling with not, I don't want to say with her voice, but with voicing what she really wants for her. So for her then to become the voice of a child who has always just been baggage, and now she's got to be the voice to be able to not just protect her, help her to feel seen, and try to do it without, anybody hearing her knees knock. Like, that's a huge ask. Right. And then when other people are trying to help her do it, she's like, no, I want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. And this is all like, while all these things are going on, while all the giggles and grins are going on, while all the more cups of coffee and a little bit of rolling around in the hay, she is starting to learn the type of woman she wants to be and how she wants to show up. And all of those moments are necessary for us to believe that that is who Naomi is. And that is the Naomi that is going to protect Waylay. And that is the Naomi that is going to love Knox wholeheartedly. And that is the Naomi that's not going to take no more bull. And that's when we're like, okay, sign me up 10 times. Here's my credit card.
Yes. And then you do it, Dana, and you go and buy the audiobook, the Kindle book, the physical copy, and you're like, Lucy Score, do you have any other versions of this book that I can give you my money for?
I'll be like the little girl that gets throwing my money out the window. But here's the thing. And this is about, yes, this is about complex characters. But I think a lot of times when you're talking about it as a writer, especially if you're a newer writer, or if you're a writer where this is an area where you struggle, it can be almost like you have to be mechanical to get to the point where it's smooth. So I would say when you're talking about characters that sound like this, and if in any way it resonates with you as being an area where, oh, this is how I want it to feel, or I love how she did this, begin to just pause and ask yourself, what was it that made you feel moved by it? What was it? A moment? Was it the dialogue? Was it the relationships? Was it the interactions? And how do you think she did that? Because I think sometimes a hard pause. I believe this is one of the beautiful things about romance being, air quotes, formulaic, because a lot of the undercurrent and the infrastructure is essentially the same. So then you really can sort of zero in on, okay, well, how was this done? And you can, in the beginning, I'll tell my clients in a minute, create a checklist. If you know you need to put all this stuff in this chapter, and they be like, I don't want it, you want it to come from your heart, it's not in your heart yet. Get a checklist until it is. Right? And then, okay, you don't have to tell nobody. Only you and I know. I ain't telling nobody. You ain't telling nobody. Good.
It's not like they're going to see the reader's not going to see the checklist. Come on.
Listen, but if you have that plot hole, they'll feel it, even if they don't know what it is. And so I would say, find characters that make you feel like, oh my goodness. And then being able to layer it. Like when we talk about Waylay, if you go back and read those first chapters, when Naomi went into Waylay's room in that trailer, one of the first things that she noticed, I think she's a girly girl. And that would have been the furthest from what you would have thought about Waylay, but it's because she never had the chance. She never had the chance. So not only do we see how love changes Naomi and how love changes Knox, but we see how love changed Waylay. Because she could be a kid and still feel safe and still feel protected and still feel loved. And so I think that's where, going back to when we I feel like we've started this podcast a million years ago, way back in the day. Going back to like why I love romance is because of this. It's like it's this, chandeliers swinging moments that's on the surface, but underneath, it's the stuff that makes us like our hearts beat, that makes us want to feel that way, that we want our kids to feel that way, and it comes down to how do you see those characters? How do they act out from those emotional places? We had the witty banter, the jokes back and forth, having to decide, how do they grow individually? How do they grow as a couple? What are moments that you want to see that we witness on the page so that we are in alignment with how you see them as the author? And what are the moments that causes them to be totally vulnerable? Because it's almost like you have to get totally vulnerable to have a step further in those, like the growth moment in those characters. And so when you find characters like this, grab a hold of them, especially if they're like your jam. Like, and all of them are not going to be your jam, not the whole book, right? I think the whole book is great as a whole, but there's a couple that you will always remember. Always remember that you can go back to. It's like, okay, I want to study how she did Knox. I want to study how she did this or that. And it just, it just makes you excited to be a writer and to just strengthen that muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to say, like, this is, and you mentioned it before, but, we read these final drafts from people, right? I don't know how many times Lucy Score edited, but I know this wasn't her first draft. Okay. So, number one, right, comparing your first draft to her like 20th draft, like let's slow down, let's reel it back and remember where we are in the process. But number two, because you mentioned like it can feel daunting when you see these amazing works. I mean, I look at Ninth House, right, and it is this amazing work, and Lucy Score's, Things We Never Got Over, an amazing work, and it's easy to fall into getting intimidated by it. But really, the beauty of being a writer and being a creative is this is your opportunity to get curious and to get inspired. So like take, sort of like reframe that intimidation and say, well, what is it that I loved? And just like you said, start reverse engineering. What are those two things that I couldn't get enough of? And then go and look at them more closely and then practice recreating those kinds of things in your writing and let it be an experiment, let it be exploratory, and let it be a part of moving wherever you're at in your current novel forward. And that's really where you kind of get to enter that dialogue with the authors that you admire and the authors who are creating the works that the kinds of works you want to create. And it becomes this back and forth with you and your favorite author so that you can be like Dana and Lucy Score can be your BFF in your head.
Come, Lucy.
If you're listening to this, Lucy, hit me up. Okay.
So, y'all. And I totally agree. I think we see that here with your main characters. We also see that with your side characters and your secondary characters. And you said something that was like dead on of like, and I wrote it down too, like every character has baggage. And that's absolutely correct. And not only do we see that, but we also see an expert way of planting seeds for future stories, right? And which just sets up. It's like a layup for a slam dunk. It was like, listen, she didn't come to play, right? So, then getting to, the setup of the stories of Nash and Lucian and Sloan and Layla. Is that her name? What is the
Lena.
second? Lena. Thank you. Why do I always forget her name? I don't think I wanted her to be named. But yes. So and again, another reason why I just think this is it's a mixture of structure of just like how she just does a great job of this being a great book one, and leading into the rest of the series, which sort of takes me to like one of the things I want to talk about that I feel like is not a huge point, but it is, which is the heat level. this story would be classified as a slow burn. And now when they get to the hibbity dibbity, it is spicy. So it is steamy once they get there. I don't sound like I don't sound like hibbity dibbity. But when they get there,
That was not the comparison I was expecting. I have never in my mind had like Dana, never once have I like been thinking about you or reflecting upon you and Adam Sandler show up anywhere in the mix.
I love you so much, Sandler. Okay. It's a slow burn. It is steamy when it happens, but I think this is a great book because you would think because of the length that it would be steamier, or that the intimacy would come sooner in the story. And here is where doing all of the legwork in the other sections, the structuring, the tropes, the pacing, made it so that you didn't miss it. You did not doubt for 1 minute that they wanted each other. You did not doubt for one moment their attraction. You did not doubt that they were struggling because he knew he wasn't about to change and she knew he wasn't a changing type. Okay? And so, and that just made it even more intense. And so I think even if you were a person where I don't want to write a small town romance story, but I do want to have a second subplot of a love story or a subplot of a romance, how can I ensure that it is believable and that there is still chemistry without doing the physical act? Or if you're someone that wants to do a sweet romance, I think this could have, I'm glad she didn't. I think it could have still been a sweet if she wanted to. And I think what it can help you to do is start asking yourself about, well, if they did not have, they had intimacy in other ways, touch, eye contact, gestures of love or emotion and feeling. And you see all of that and beginning to look at those things and how that can be interpreted to us as the reader of understanding how they're growing, right? Because they're stuck together, but they were still trying to almost get away. Now he was trying to follow her. She was trying to get away. But it still led to the same place of them falling in love. And so you can look at that for whether it's about pacing, believability, the attraction, the fact that they find a way to have intimacy in a crowded space, right? Because there's a lot of people kind of coming in and out of this relationship, and they are still almost like those invisible strings are there for all of us to see, and also that is almost tempered a little bit with humor. Even though the banter almost adds gasoline at times, right? So it sort of relieves the tension, but sometimes it's the cause of the tension. And so I think just playing with those levers at the times that are appropriate makes it so that it is still satisfying, even for someone that may be a steamy romance reader to read this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you are writing, I think I already said this, I don't know. When we record, it all kind of starts to blur together because I have notes. We've had conversations before we started recording. We've been talking on Marco Polo. I mean, it was just like, right. But if you are right, even if you are working with a subplot, if it is a slow burn subplot or if it's enemies to lovers subplot, even if it's not romance forward, this is one to look at because she really does sell us. She creates the tension on the slow burn, and she does a really great job of drawing out that tension and giving them occasions to run into each other, bump heads, and keep that tension crackling. And to sell us on, like you said, on that attraction and selling us on the shift from that enemies to lovers as they're kind of, seeing these other sides to each other and coming to, they start to admire certain qualities in each other, but then those same qualities are infuriating. So it keeps that tension going that little bit longer. And these are some, if you're going enemies to lovers or slow burn, even in a subplot, these are things you want to look at because if you have a romantic subplot, you are going to need your plot to bring those lovers into contact with each other. And they have to keep running into each other, and they're going to have to keep butting heads. And the plot is going to need to do that, as with all things, but as with all kinds of subplots, so that it doesn't feel like something you tacked on or something that feels tangential. And you don't want that. You want your romantic subplot to melt into the rest of the story and participate with the rest of the story. And it's really important. And so, you like seeing the way that Lucy Score takes those opportunities to bring them in contact with each other and cause that conflict is going to help you no matter what kind of story you're writing, even if that's even if that subplot, right, or even if that romance is a subplot.
One thing that I don't think I've ever really noticed, and what you're saying, I totally agree with. The other thing that I think is people can think because I decide to go sweet or slow burn, that makes it easier to write intimacy because I don't have to write the steamy scene on the page yet. But the reality is exactly, because we still have to believe when they get ready to listen, y'all, I'm just gonna make it sound bad, jumping in the bed, right? When they get ready to get there, they don't got to earn that. And we have got to believe that. It's almost harder than if they just had a one night stand and they've already done it. Well, it's almost like ripping the Band-Aid off. Like they've already done it. Like it's almost easier to keep doing it than to not do it and want to do it. And so it sounds so odd, but it's like you really are sort of juggling the different things. You're juggling that external, you're juggling internal, you're juggling the intimacy and the romance. And so it doesn't make it easier because you decide to turn it into a slow burn. You're not just stretching out time and suspending time until that time comes. You are still working for that moment from the time they have them meet from the time. So knowing that and preparing yourself for that and pacing yourself for that is equally as challenging and also rewarding. So that, as you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, that really is true. Like you could think, oh, this is going to be easy. Because look, instead of having to do, I don't know, in a book like this, 10 or 12, like rope-a-dopes, you only get a couple, but baby, you don't work for those. So yes. The final thing that I'll say about heat levels before we move in, I guess, to the last thing that I had is know your audience. Like it's okay if you don't want to write the steamy scene, but if you pitch that book and you set that book up as if it's more and you don't deliver, let me know how that work out for you. Okay. Actually, you don't got to let me know, but if you want to, where to find me. And so, be mindful of that. Like, know your audience, know the audience that you're going after, and know what you want your readers to expect from you as an author. And I think she does a great job of sort of being one of those authors that can almost straddle that line. She can have something that's a little more racy, and she can have slow burn, and people won't bark at it. But I think it's because she mastered how to manage that heat level, so you don't miss it, because you haven't missed the chemistry between them. So when you get ready to do this, know it, and if you feel uncomfortable or unsure, read more and begin to really just, you don't have to take notes, like this kind of take notes, like as if you're writing, but become a student of what are the things that are on this page that are not that don't appear to be connected to intimacy, but are what's kindling this fire between them. And how can you do more of that? The fact that they're forced together is almost a guarantee. And the more that they banter, that just became the gasoline that kept stoking that fire. So that when they just opened the floodgates, it was like, oh my gosh, they both were just out of their minds. And that's because it was this sort of buildup and progression. And so I would just say, when you make that decision, don't make it lightly. And the final thing I will say about the making of the decision is also know yourself. Listen, I know many of romance writer that's like, look, grown folks do the hibbity dibbity, but writing sex scenes is stressful, okay? They are stressful. Well, it takes just as long to write a whole chapter than it do to do a sex scene. So being aware of that, and of yourself and how do you want to do that and what's the best way so that you don't allow the tension and the challenge of that moment to overshadow all the other work that you've done. And that's where working with somebody or working with the editor if you need help with that. But just knowing yourself and listen, girl, if you need a checklist, bruh, if you need a checklist, do you need a hibbity-dibbity checklist? Maybe.
I would coin that phrase, hashtag hibbity dibbity checklist. I'll just keep that thing on hand.
Don't you do it. I'm gonna say I get 10%. Hibbity-dibbity, no, 50%. Hibbity-dibbity checklist. But yes. So knowing that and know that you can and will get better the more you want to and doing some of the things like that we've talked about here.
So I think that we're probably getting to just about time for the episode. So are there any last takeaways you want to make sure we hit before we actually call it a wrap on things we never got over? Any last takeaways that writers should be keeping in mind?
Yeah, the final thing, and because I feel like at each section we talked about it, and I'll just wrap it up like with a bow, but the other part was themes. Themes is something that I would say don't skate over them. If you nail themes and you're still a newbie at the writing part, you can still #win. Okay? Because the themes are the part that causes people to really be emotionally invested in the story. And it can also be the reason why you are emotionally invested in the story. And this story has so many themes. I think it's easy to think about redemption, but I think it's about healing and wholeness. And what does it mean to belong? And a lot of people who are readers in this niche, that's what they want. They want somewhere to feel like they belong, and they feel like they belong in Knock 'Em Out. And the way that you're able to do that is really with all the other dynamics that we've talked about. And so, like, the bow that I'll do before I see if there's anything else you wanted to ask me is like, know that we are kind of giving this a brush. This is because we both have read this book many times. You could continue to read this book and still run circles around us. And it all is going to depend on what you like, what you need, what you want to learn from this score. Step up, get your learn on. And I think it also is about really being a student of the craft and I say that in a way that's not like, I think when I hear that, I think people talk about it in a way of literary and classics. I'm talking about in categorical fiction, that it is about hot times and all this stuff, but there's a lot of undercurrent of how we move and groove and why we are one of the best selling niches out there. Okay. And let full stop, as the kids say. But as you look at this story, I would say don't take on everything. I always tell my clients, find the one or two things that will have the most significant impact or the things that you want to master the most. And just work on those and pick a project. And don't pick up one, put down, don't do all of that. The Bob Hope, stop it. Or was it Newhart? Stop it. Instead, pick it up, work for a full project, give yourself time to evaluate how it went and then what you would do differently, and then make those adjustments before going into a new project. But this is definitely a book that if you want a true contemporary romance, you want small town with all of the feels and the laughs and the drama and the shenanigans. If you want something that makes readers feel endeared to your characters and you as a writer. And if you just want an overall entertaining book that you can read over and over again, then this is one of the books for you. It should be on your shelf for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Again, my clients aren't primarily romance. They do a lot of romantic subplots, which is why romance is always going to be relevant. It is the top selling genre. And honestly, like even for non-romance readers, so many readers love a romantic subplot though. So always romance is always relevant. And this is, such a great study, just like you said, in endearing your reader to your characters, and to you, there, by proxy, yourself as an author, and yeah, really, I think using demonstrating themes without, again, this is similar to Ninth House in that it really evokes themes without feeling heavy-handed, because so one of my personal pet peeves is when you watch an author like they want the theme there, so they stick it in. Like they, you know what I mean? They just, it's an insertion, and it's like the author reached out. Like you're reading the book, you're suspending disbelief. You are in the mise en scène, right? You're in the environment. You're captivated by the story. Then the writer just reaches out and they just like, they deck you with the theme because they're afraid you didn't catch it. Don't trust your readers. They're gonna catch it. If the nature of the conflicts are evoking your theme, if the kinds of struggles that your secondary and tertiary characters are experiencing are, reflections of your theme, your reader will catch it. You don't have to slap them. It's okay. It's okay. And also just really embracing reading as a study, embracing reading like a writer to grow your craft, to get curious, I love that, build your skills, but focus on one or two. Don't try to do 10 things at once. Pick a couple, see it through, and then reevaluate and recalibrate. And it's going to get you really, really far. Anything else before I wrap us?
No, I think that is absolutely it. I just want to say for the record, Rachel did it again. She said one of them words. What's the word mean, girl? The mise en, in all fairness, this is my film studies husband taught me this term, uses this term. It's about when you're watching a film and you're locked into it, it creates that sense of being like engaged in the movie where you're kind of everything else is suspended and you're in the experience, in that sense of place in the movie. So I'm sorry. I'm not gonna call him out on this podcast because he's my brother, but I'm listening.
That's right.
Listen, if you watch YouTube, they don't like this blink, blink, like.
Char's gonna listen back to this episode and be like, sorry, Dana.
My bad. Oh, sorry. Back to the regularly scheduled program, but yes. No, I think that was perfect. Perfect.
Awesome. Well, minus me and my silly French words, throwing them in there just for grins and giggles. That is a wrap for today's episode and for The Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. So if you haven't already, pick up this book, give it a read. You will definitely learn something. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and if you're looking for us, you can find us at storydeepdive.com. We will see you next week for our next book pick, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. And until then, happy writing.